What's happening, all you beautiful people? We have a brand new episode of The Strange Road for you. I'm your host, Mikey, and of course, the bro host with the mo host, Bub. How you doing, Bub?
That. I still like that. I'm great. I like it.
And tonight, of course, we have Stoner and Disbro holding it down in master control. And guess what, guys? We got the master control camera back in action. Say what's up, fellas. There they are. Come on now.
Quad squad.
There it is. All right. Yeah. Hey, guys, look at that. Hard at work, as usual. Appreciate that, fellas. We also appreciate the hell out of all you guys listening and watching. If you want to support the show, all the links are in the description at The Strange Road on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. We have the Strange Road podcast group on Facebook, rocking and rolling. And if you're watching in YouTube, always like, subscribe, share to all your friends and family if you enjoy this show. And if you're listening in Apple Podcasts and Spotify, leave us a review. That would be so awesome.
How about this?
We really appreciate it.
How about also, if you know anybody that doesn't know how to use a podcast player, like my mother, and how I had to show her the other night that you do have a native podcast player on any Apple device, especially, and probably Google Android devices, whatever you. Just show them how to use it, set it up. It doesn't cost anything. You know, it's free.
Yeah.
I did that for her because I was like, oh, you don't even listen like my own mother.
They don't know how to listen to a podcast.
Yep,
good point.
Yep. Just got to help extend that knowledge base sometimes because I know that we think it's very, permeated throughout society and culture, but some people are still like, I don't know how to get to a podcast. So help everybody get to listening to what they need to. Yeah,
so leave us a review. We really, really appreciate you guys. We're going to jump right in.
Game on.
This is, we're super, super stoked. Our next guest reached out to me recently, and we started chatting a little bit. I was like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Into very similar things. We're cross-pollinating with a lot of different folks now. But let's hop right in. Justin Brown, welcome to the show. Justin is the host of Prometheus Lens podcast. Welcome, brother. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. How you guys doing?
Doing great. Great. Yeah, man. Welcome.
I love what you guys do. Love you guys.
Appreciate that.
Really, really appreciate that. Yeah, I've been watching a couple of your videos. I think really we just started chatting earlier this week, or was it last week? So here we are. I'm super stoked. I mean, you're into a lot of this similar things. Recently, you guys have been doing episodes about Enki, Enlil, some of the Sumerian gods and myths and legends. Some of the guests you've had on have been fire. So I'm really stoked to jump right in. But first, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you started Prometheus Lens.
Well, yeah, my name's Justin, and this all started, honestly, was just a study group, like a Bible study group. I discovered Michael Heiser's Unseen Realm, and it was kind of a new concept to where I'm from. Deep down in the South, it's a lot of Baptists and missionary Baptists and stuff like that, and it's all the Trinity and things like that, and the Sethite worldview instead of Genesis 6. So I invited like 15, 20 guys, and couple guys, 3 actually showed up. And after a couple meetings, my buddy's like, hey, my brother knows how to do podcasts. He can teach us how to do this. And we're having some really good conversations. We should record this stuff. And a year in, met a lot of great people, had some interesting conversations. And I've always been a history buff and looked into the epics and the myths and stuff like that, and conspiracy theories, just all these fascinating subjects I've always just loved and had a passion for. And maybe a year into doing the Dig Bible podcast, I was like, I want to do this, but I want to go farther than just the Bible. I want to dive into ancient history and conspiracy and had just more conversations. I couldn't get enough. So I just started Prometheus Lens and been doing that and just reaching out to all these authors and researchers and just geeking out and loving every minute of it.
Yeah, man, you've been busy. You've made quite a network. We've been chatting a little bit about our mutual friend Heather Arnold, who we had on earlier this year. And LA, of course, is a legend in the Giants world. And so it was really cool. Like, LA is definitely somebody we'd love to talk to.
Sure.
And then Fritz Zimmerman, that's one of the first books I ever bought. Because he's got also has the travel guidebook that goes with the ancient, the Nephilim of North America.
Okay.
So, and then the second book you can get with it is just literally a guidebook. It tells you where all the mounds and earthworks are. So Fritz he's old school. That's like one of the first things that ever came on my radar when I was looking into that. So yeah, man, you've been busy. It's just been kind of putting pieces together and talking to all these people that are really digging in. What's your experience been like so far?
It's just been fascinating, like with me, because I grew up in the church. So, I mean, I have my, preconceived notions and my beliefs, but growing up and hearing all these stories and reading the Bible, I have that biblical worldview. Mm-hmm. And what I think is just so fascinating is where I have that foundation. And now I'm going out and I'm talking to all these people and looking into the histories and stuff. You see all these common themes, and it's like I'm just connecting dots. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing this mosaic picture of everything from like 30,000 feet. And I'm like, oh, well, this is Genesis 6, the fallen angels. Oh, well, the Olympian gods, they Zeus breeded with the human women and made Hercules. So that's a Nephilim. And Abraham Lincoln, you find a quote from him talking about the giants looking at Niagara and their bones fill the mounds of America.
That's a great one.
And it's just like,
that's one of our faves.
I remember that quote.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We put that
Lincoln was kind of a giant too. He might have had some Marfan syndrome.
Yeah. Maybe that's why he was interested in it.
There are stories that he was able to hold an axe by the handle by pinching it with the axe head out. Like
that might be a tall tale.
He was. Do you know how big he was?
He was like 6'6", which is huge for back then when people were like 5'2".
Bro, they made Lincoln the Vampire Slayer about him. Like, come on.
Yeah,
He's mythologized, but he had Marfans probably. He did. Well, whatever. That's the other.
A lot of people like to pick apart that Lincoln quote, but I've read the entire speech.
I love that
in the context, because a lot of people are like, well, people just like to take that out of context.
They're saying it's miscontextualized.
Yeah, but I've read the whole speech, and he is talking about giant bones,
right,
in the upstate New York area,
right.
Yeah,
we know they were there.
Mm-hmm.
Anywho,
so yeah,
and then you find people like L.A. and Fritz finding these bones. Mm-hmm. That one picture that L.A. found at Catalina, that museum. Have you heard that story? He went digging through the archives there and found a picture of this explorer, and I can't remember his name now for the life of me, but there's a picture of him standing, like leaning on a shovel, and there's a hole dug out in front of him, and there's a skeleton laying there.
Yeah.
And L.A. got to looking at it, and he was like, man, curled up even in the fetal position. This skeleton is just as tall as him, if not taller.
Yeah.
So then he got to looking a little closer, and he sent the picture. He took a picture of it and sent it off. And these guys, basically broke it apart and used computers to stand it up. And it was almost 10 feet tall. Mm-hmm. And then he got to looking closer. It has 6 fingers.
Okay.
And that was something that the biblical giants, that was characteristics that they had. Then you get into the Indian mythology, or quote unquote mythology, is they constantly battled red-haired, 6-fingered giants.
Yeah.
But he found not one, but 2. And he told the curator of the museum about it, and they're like, oh, well, cool, thanks. And so he ends up coming back, and they have that picture posted up in the museum. But lo and behold, they photoshopped the skeleton out of the shot. Wow.
Now, Catalina Island is really, really well known for having a ton of giant skeletons that, like you said, that explorer, his name is escaping me right now, but he was very, very reputable and an archaeologist as well. From what I understand, he was a professional. He was getting funding for a long time by universities, and he found so much stuff there. They built a museum. He helped curate the whole thing, and then he was just digging up giant bones all the time.
I don't know the story that well.
We covered a very little bit. Yeah. Catalina Island's like a hot spot for, like, eventually, if you're looking into giants, a lot of roads lead to Catalina Island.
I like that.
Yeah.
I'll go to Catalina Island.
Yeah. There's a lot of other weird stuff with Catalina Island, too.
I'll take it.
Yeah, but you find it everywhere. Aruba, the Levant. Africa. I mean, it's just everywhere.
Ohio.
Yeah, you guys are sitting on a powder keg.
Oh yeah, dude. It's definitely a thing. And we have one of the OG giant researchers who wrote one of the first books, I think, really in modern giant North American lore, at least, is Ross Hamilton. And he wrote Tradition of the Giants in 2007, which Jim Vieira, Hugh Newman, a lot of those guys went to him when they wrote their book, Giants on Record. I know he wrote the foreword and kind of helped him out with that book quite a bit. But, a lot of people have kind of taken Ross's research as well over the years, where he's kind of never been given credit. Yeah. But he's got a lot of books on archaeoastronomy of Serpent Mound and different things like that. But he's kind of right here. He lives an hour from us. Yeah. And we've got to interview him and hang out with him a few times. And he's a living wizard, Ross. Magical human being. Yeah. That's the only way I can describe him. Yes. We do have a video on our YouTube channel with Ross where we interviewed him in 2020 on the winter solstice. So if you guys ever TSR live on YouTube, you can check that out. Yep. But yeah, Ohio's definitely a hot spot for it. We've got a lot of giant researchers here, and there's so many newspaper articles and countless stories and town hall reports where it's kind of there's something there. It's weird artifacts that are out of place. That's what got me kind of hooked. And I've lived here my whole life and didn't find out about this stuff until like 2013. Yeah. So imagine my surprise when I've been into the strange and the weird and the paranormal my whole life and never knew about giant skeletons being found in Ohio. No. In ancient burial mounds.
Never heard mentioned. Yeah, we've
it's like, how does that happen? Yeah. Justin, how does that happen?
Smithsonian did a good job. Smithsonian did a good job.
Yeah, like what you said, airbrushing the pictures. You airbrush enough pictures, you airbrush enough history, you rewrite a book enough this way, you change a carving etching at Serpent Mound now that says, used to say free to the public, you just airbrush that out of there, you just wipe it off the stone, you sandblast it up. Yeah. You just again, it's who really knows where anything ever started, but we're not going to really know because we do this. A lot of cultures have done this over the years: take over, adopt, repurpose, retool, maybe not give credit. We just had Ross Hamilton where you're saying he doesn't even get credit, right? Mm-hmm. So are we going to give credit to the giants? We don't give credit in modern day to somebody writing a portion of a book or a citation. So yeah, it's tough for us as humans to give credit for whatever reason. We just don't like to give credit. We want to take our own.
Well, just like the Serpent Mound and down in Peru, and you see all these giant connections and with these megaliths, and then the local people tell you, no, we didn't build it. Right. Oh, yeah, you did. The archaeologists and historians. Yeah, you did. You just forgot. But you see it throughout the world. All these megalith sites and these cultures that are gathered around it say they didn't build it. They found it this way. Or the ones that do have an oral tradition or history of that place, it's a common theme. The giants built it.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Stonehenge. Right. So many.
God, I just listened to one the other day. My father was like, he didn't want to watch Ancient Aliens. It's like, come on, Dad. It's like watch it on a Sunday or something, right? And it was Nan Madol. Yeah. They're talking about the two giant brothers that constructed Nan Madol and, built these big basalt, Lincoln log columns up and stuff. And it's like,
those are so weird. Nan Madol is so strange. Different.
There's a lot of places like that. But
it's even like just stone Lincoln logs. That's a great way to explain it. It doesn't make any sense.
Right. And how do you pick up those and move them? And
Excuse me.
It's funny because there was a post today that I was cracking up about because somebody was saying, oh, the pyramid was built, this way and that way. And we know it was pulleys and yada, yada, and X, Y, Z. And it's like, okay, if you know, but I'm just saying, if you know, then it should be undebatable. We should be able to reproduce it in some kind of CGI computer mock-up model with all the physics and everything built into it. We can do it, right? We have the computer power for that. We can do that. But nobody's ever proven it. It's always just like, well, I think. And I do with any theory.
It's all theories.
I get that. And that's why I say with any theory, I get really upset when it's like, it's just a theory. If you're saying it's proven, then that's one thing, and then you should be able to do it. But if it's just a theory, don't act like it's so commonplace and everybody should be able to understand.
We know. Like, we know better. We know the dates.
It's just frustrating.
There is no room for any debate. This is what is in the books, in the textbooks. You hear that? We know that human beings have only been in North America for until Clovis.
No, we
now
don't.
Clovis is just obliterated because of San Diego.
That should be a human motto or like
Florida.
A crest when we're born. You should have this crest or some kind
Catalina
of insignia
Island.
that we know nothing. That should be everybody from the day one. Is you should be instructed that you should know that you know nothing, but you're learning as you go.
By the way,
diddly.
Yeah, Bo Diddley, baby.
Bo Diddley.
You know diddly. Gotta love that.
That's one of our favorite sayings. But now, I will say, Catalina Island, we covered on Strange Happenings. It's blowing up the entire textbooks right now on the age of people in North America. Is Catalina Island. The body they found was 23,000 years old. And it's Catalina Island off the coast of San Diego. We covered it in Strange Happenings. So, boom, there you go. Circle back to Catalina Island. So, I mean, there's something to that place for sure. There were ancient people on that island for going back 23,000 years.
Wouldn't you?
So, it wasn't a giant, but it's evidence of an ancient culture on Catalina Island.
Everything we believe is a guess, and the guess is wrong 90% of the time. I mean, even look at that guy from I want to say his name is Richard, but I could be wrong. But I know he was from California, the University of California. He actually found a Triceratops horn, and everybody that finds any kind of dinosaur fossils, they want to preserve it. Well, this guy gets the wild idea to cut it in half. He cuts it in half, and what's he find? He finds soft, living tissue. If this thing is billions of years old, like they say, it wouldn't have soft tissue, live tissue in it.
It's not billions, right? Millions.
Yeah, 65 million years.
Well, it's still a lot. Still a lot, regardless.
Oh, yeah.
65 million years. I'm not here to split hairs over that. Sorry, Justin. This is just where my devil's advocate stupidity comes in sometimes. Yeah, generally all that. But you're right.
That far back
the Inca stones.
But that should be...
Inca stones. They're depicted riding dinosaurs and using them for weapons of war. I mean, man walked with the dinosaurs.
Here's another wild one. Recently, they found a well-preserved part of a human brain that was like a couple thousand years old. They had no idea how it was preserved, like good tissue. So what you're saying is, with even the Triceratops horn, I have a much tougher time wrapping my head around how does something millions and millions and millions and tens of millions of years old have good living tissue in it. But what do you think about certain things like that, like finding some of these out-of-place artifacts, right? Like where it's like the timeline doesn't match up and you're like, we haven't been here that long, or how long have we been here? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, of course, and I'll go ahead and say it. I mean, it's a guess. You know, I mean, that's
100%.
We're all being honest.
Sure.
But I mean, if you look at carbon dating, you can date something and it says, 10,000 years, and you can move 1 centimeter over and now it's 100,000. It's so all over the place. And if you look at the process of it, they're dating rocks and saying it's this old by this other rock.
Well, they're dating the material around the structure because you can't carbon date rock. So it's just if they find organic material around. So if you dig down to a point and you get carbon, you test that. That doesn't mean that's the age of the structure. That just means people were there at that time. If you dig down deeper, most of the time they just don't dig down deeper. And then when you dig down deeper, guess what? You find more carbon.
You find more stuff.
And it pushes the date back. So
that's
here
the craziest
at
stuff.
Serpent Mound,
that's the craziest stuff.
They only dug 2 feet down and found we found a piece of carbon. We date it to, 1200 AD.
Yeah.
And that's the date of it. But if you just kept digging down, 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 you would find probably much older carbon that could, but if you stop digging.
Yeah, but you can't even really trust that because if you look at the biblical narrative, there was a great deluge, right?
Yeah.
And even if you take the Bible off the table, there's many cultures throughout the world that have the same story, just different names and caveats to it. But when you read in Genesis, a lot of people just get hung up on the rain. Not only did the rain come, it says that the waters from the abyss burst forth. So we know there's water underneath the ground. We dig wells every day. So, Dr. Walt Brown, he wrote a book called In the Beginning, and he had a theory. And this guy worked for NASA. He was a smart guy, but his hydroplate theory basically answers all the questions that we have. And it's like basically some kind of cataclysm happened, whether it was a comet, earthquake, but something triggered these events. And when that happened, if you look at the Earth, it's a globe. Well, the oceanic ridge is like a fault line, like a scar that runs along the ocean beds all around the world, like a seam on a baseball. Well, that's a fracture line from this event. And he says what happened is all the magma and everything from underneath the core burst forth, and then all the subterranean waters burst forth. Well, when this happened, the plates pushed apart. He said, and he guessed, he said maybe, like 60 miles an hour. He said, and like a car hood, when you hit a wall, it crumbles upward, right? So he said, the same thing happened here. He said, so all this water burst forth, this soot and this dirt and this ash. He said, and that's why when you look in the fossil record, you find dinosaurs that are still in the act of giving birth, still in the act of fighting, in the midst of eating. They died instantly because they were either buried by all this ground that was threw up in this event. He said, where the plates were shifting, volcanoes were erupting, earthquakes were happening, soot was filling the air, it darkened the sun, brought down the temperatures of the earth, and brought on the first ice age. So with the whole carbon dating thing, it's like, that's why it's so all over the place, is because you could have a piece of dirt that was near the magma and everything else that got through up, and now it's on top, and everything's just been so displaced. And that's why you find the fossil record the way it is. And then, like you'd mentioned, the Young Dryas, this brought on the first ice age. So then you had the first ice age, but it took, like 1,000 years or so for all this to happen. It didn't happen instantly.
Right.
But that's why you find so many sunken cities, because they would, they would build on these coastlines, and this newly formed land would sink. And then the ice later that would melt, and it would have another flood, but they was more like localized floods and stuff. And I loved how he described all that. He's like, and that's why you see all the pelts on the near side of the moon, because this event, all this crust and rocks slinging out into the atmosphere and hitting the moon and just pelting it. And he said, in this oceanic ridge you see, that's why if you look, every single major mountain range in the world line up parallel with this ridge. Because it was once one supercontinent. When this happened, it pushed everything apart. It's pretty wild stuff, man. If you haven't read that
very
book,
I have never heard that, but you could tell I was captivated because I wasn't saying
if
word.
you want to keep going,
you had me.
And you got any more information about that?
In the beginning, right on.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
I always
have
wondered.
A signed copy.
Hell yeah, man. I did always wonder when you look at Google Earth, especially how good of resolution it's getting. You look at it does look like the Earth was just pulled apart in the Atlantic Ocean. It's a scar. It's like this, and it's like you said, the abyss, the oceanic cliff. I mean, we don't even have submarines that can go down there. And
I don't know if we had
the Atlantic Rift is no joke.
Well, the Marianas Trench is the deepest.
The Marianas Trench. All those, where those continental plates got pushed apart.
It's just the amount of atmospheric pressure that is underneath that much water is impressive.
But look at the scarring on the ocean.
Let's not forget the recent, Endeavour submarine that went down there with all the
right. I wouldn't even
ventures. Yeah. That crushing pressure, though. I mean, that's why it's still like one of the, we talked about it yesterday with the whole Antarctica thing in the show and whatever, about how many times can we say that there are places on the earth that are less explored than the freaking moon? Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like, we don't know our own backyard.
Ocean.
It'd be like, hey, you own this house. Have you seen the attic? Oh, no. We're not going up in the attic. We wouldn't do that. Why not?
Yeah,
go look.
What gets me about Antarctica is you can't get the world's governments to agree on anything.
Yep.
But this one subject, every single world or nation in the world is in agreement to protect it, and all the world's governments work together to protect it.
Never
going on?
That
never happens.
Please expound upon that if you have any more thoughts upon that, because I have a special place in my heart for Antarctica, and I don't even know when it started, but now that icy ember's burning, it's not going to stop. Like, I'm just more interested. And you're saying the same thing, things that I haven't even really thought of bringing up yet, but I'm aware of. But it is a weird topic of, like, everybody's like, you know what? Hey, everybody, hands off Antarctica. Let's all agree. Even though there could be rich resources down there, strategic positioning around the world for whatever kind of defensive or offensive strategy, whatever you want, right?
Remember we were talking about Antarctica moving south, and maybe it was part of Atlantis, but does he talk about in that book?
I don't know about that yet.
Anything with Antarctica shifting down to the South Pole, that maybe even Antarctica was before this giant upheaval during the Younger Dryas period. Or was this a much more ancient event when the ocean kind of exploded?
It was before that, because the way he talked about it was it was one supercontinent, and then that happened, and then all the water that didn't make it out of our atmosphere, it froze and came down in big chunks of ice. So that's why you get the mammoth covered just in the middle of walking or giving birth, frozen in time instantly, because it's buried in ice instantly. And then the ones that were in the areas where the dirt and just the large rocks went up and flew down, they were just buried alive. But his theory was when this happened, all the soot, the ash, and all the stuff from the volcanoes, it darkened the sun and lowered the temperatures and brought the first ice age. But once everything started settling and the temperatures came back up, it caused this huge melt. And the melt was the Younger Dryas, and he mentions that in the book too. But he said that when this happened, there was a big polar shift in the axis and stuff like that. So he talks about all that stuff too.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've been hearing. And at one of the points, there was all this was happening, but then a comet came. And parts of the comet before the big one hit, which was Meltwater B, which they think was like the Canadian Arctic. And then when the bigger part hit that's what melted all the glaciers. And then you see the scab lands in Lake Oneida upstate New York, the Finger Lakes and these features, that all that meltwater came down and just ripped apart the land. And it's good evidence that something cataclysmic, comet related happened kind of at the beginning of that Younger Dryas. But then all the ash that you talked about, because the boneyard in Alaska, I don't know if you're hip to that, but all those animals were just buried in really a few acres. And they had Pleistocene animals that were never supposed to live in Alaska. And like you said, all of a sudden they were just buried like that. There's a layer of ash over everything where basically the entire forest or wherever they were completely burned. And that's because parts of those comets were breaking off and exploding like Tunguska all over the earth before they could impact. So then that's a lot of the fire and soot that they find apparently is because of these huge fires.
And that polar shift too, you can see, like, because the mammoth and some of these animals that they're finding buried in these like Arctic places have tropical food in their mouth and in their bellies. So this shows you that that Iceland used to be tropical. And if you look at some of the megaliths and stuff like that, they lined all these things up astronomically. So like America's Stonehenge, for instance, if you've looked into that, they have found a huge Ouroboros rock formation built around the site. And it's basically the snake eating its tail. And they said in a lot of these alignments that they found line up with Draco. So it was their theory that Mr. Stone in L.A., that between that and some other places, they're leaving my mind at this moment, but basically there was all kinds of astronomical alignments that pointed to Draco being the North Star. at one point in time.
Yeah, it's here at Serpent Mountain.
Shows that shit. Yeah.
Draco was the North Star at one point, and that's how some people were trying to date Serpent Mountain, is because Polaris is the North Star now, but that pole shift, it used to be to Draco, which is basically a part of the Big Dipper, I believe. It's like the head of the Big Dipper.
No idea. I will not even venture
Draco.
a wild guess in that arena.
But in ancient times, Serpent Mountain used to be aligned to Draco. And a lot of other weird places are as well, like you said. That's really, really interesting. I hadn't heard that. That just blew my mind a little bit.
Yeah, and then with the Bible too, it says that, who's the prince of the power of the air? That ancient twisted serpent, Quetzalcoatl. You get this serpent imagery everywhere.
Yeah,
it's like ages. They were venerating what they seen above, as above, so below. All this stuff's just fascinating.
And the religions are so similar with Egypt and Ohio, Native Americans, ancient people here. It's very, our buddy VJ from India and the connections with the Indian mythology and serpents and yoga practices. And the connections is more and more people like yourself that we have on. It's just constantly connections being made with other people we're talking to that are coming across a lot of these similar veins. So, what was your most interesting thing that you found out about from Ohio? Or actually, better question, what's something that's burning you up right now that you're really hip to, or you're digging into right now, or maybe a recent episode that you've covered or somebody that you've interviewed that's just blown your mind?
Well, one thing that I was looking into, and I was going to talk to you guys about today, was the biblical Esau. And basically, I see a lot of connections with him, with ancient Sumerian texts. There's cryptid stuff in there. There's vampires. There's Bigfoot or werewolf. It's some pretty interesting stuff, and it's anchored in the Bible, but it goes back into the Epic of Gilgamesh. It goes into sacred garments from the Garden of God. It's a pretty wild story, man. If you guys like to hear about that,
I would love to.
I actually been studying about that, and but like I've told some people, I threw this at a few people, and they said it's blew their mind, but I've told them this is not a hill that I'm prepared to die on, but there's lots of correlations that point to this direction, and dots are connected, and it makes a pretty good case that I think that Esau could have very well been the very first Bigfoot seed.
Okay.
Why have I heard of Esau? Why do I know this? Okay,
yeah, Esau,
continue. This is
okay.
Who is Esau? Let me ask that real quick, because that's in my head.
When you get in Genesis, Esau was the twin brother of Jacob, and Jacob, who was later named Israel.
Yes.
And but when you get into Genesis chapter 25 and verse 22, it says, the children, and it's talking about these twins, it says, the children struggled together within her, so she inquired of the Lord. And verse 23 says, the Lord said, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided, and one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. So it's like he's basically telling her there's 2 nations, 2 peoples within you. One's going to be stronger than the other, and that the older shall serve the younger. When you look into how things were back then, was the eldest son always got the inheritance, not the younger. So this was strange. So, but when you look at the lexicon and get the definition for the word stronger, as this guy, is described, the 2 nations or peoples within her, in Hebrew, that means yamas, which means stout. But with this narrative about the two nations and the two peoples, it goes back to Genesis 3 in the garden with the curse. And so when you get there, Genesis 3:14, it says, the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock, above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, then you shall bruise his heel. You know, a lot of people use that analogy, you know, of Christ. You know, the serpent will bruise your heel, but you will crush his head. But it plainly says there, he's going to put enmity between her seed, the woman, and your seed. And he's talking to the serpent. So that's definitely two people, you know, two seeds. So first off, like the word nakash, that's the Hebrew word for serpent. And have you guys heard of this before? Like the differing meanings of this word?
No.
Mm-mm. Well, that word nakash, it can mean serpent, but just like English, you know, the Hebrew language is very diverse. One word can have multiple meanings. So, you know, context is very important. You know, this can mean serpent, but it can also mean shining one, or one who practices, you know, divination. So when you read the story of Genesis, you remember Adam and Eve's in the garden. This serpent offers the fruit and said, you know, you shall be as gods, and, you know, the whole narrative with that. So it's like, you got to ask yourself, this word nakash, what makes more sense in the story? A talking snake, or a divine being that was, you know, in the garden of God? Because number one, you know, snakes don't talk. Snakes don't have legs. The curse said, you know, on your belly you shall go. And when this, you know, Nakash talked to Eve, she wasn't scared. She wasn't afraid. She trusted it. So obviously she had seen this thing every day in the garden. It was, you know, amongst God's counsel, and she trusted it, right? So to me, that's the number one mistranslation of the Bible, is that word nakash. So,
man, you're kind of freaking me out right now, because I always thought that maybe that story was perverted in some way, and that the serpent he's the bringer of knowledge. Like, we all knew that. But that it was a bad thing, like he was some satanic thing, and to me, as I've kind of dug into some of this stuff, it does seem like it really did get flipped on its head.
Look at Prometheus.
Yeah.
He brought the fire down from the gods to humans, and, you know, like, did the same thing, like, kind of gave the power where it shouldn't have been. And
Quetzalcoatl,
in this
Viracocha,
instance, what you're saying too is kind of like
both.
Yeah. It's just a misinterpretation, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I've always felt that, because, you know, when you start learning about the real story behind St. Patrick's Day and the saints, and that what they were really doing was banishing the serpent cults and the old Celtic ways out of Ireland. It had nothing to do with real snakes.
I did not know that.
Yeah. And so forever they've been, you know, trying to the serpent cults, or it's a worldwide symbolism. It doesn't have anything to do with the devil, I don't think. I think it represents, like he said, as above, so below. In this, the serpent is able to travel in between worlds, and it's also a representation of ley lines, which connects all the geometry and the astronomy and the ancient sites together. And so I always felt like the serpent's always gotten a bad rap when it comes to Christianity, and even what we grew up Catholic.
Snakes always get a bad rap.
So, you know, Archangel Michael comes down, and we had those, you know, those cards.
I had a medallion like that.
And
my
Archangel Michael's
middle name.
He's got the serpent in his hand, and he's got his flaming blue sword.
Yeah. Sweet. That's cool.
So I'm really kind of blown away that you said you're a Christian, and I've never actually talked to a Christian that has kind of unraveled that, because it's something that I've been really my research has led me to, that the story of Adam and Eve is definitely not what we've been told. in the book of Enoch,
I don't know enough
in
about it
some of
again.
those older scripts, it's a lot more of a story there.
Yeah, which, I mean, it gets pretty wild because with that story, after they bite the apple, the curse comes and they're kicked out of the garden. And it says that, God clothes Adam and Eve because, once they eat the apple, they realize that they're naked. Well, the Hebrew word there that God uses for clothes is hilbish. So he clothes, he hilbishes Adam's nakedness with a tunic. With that Hebrew word is kanonet. A phrase that is most frequently used in the Torah to describe clothing of the priests in the tabernacle.
Hmm.
So, in the book of Exodus, that same word is used and it signifies to cover their nakedness. And that's how it's translated in Exodus chapter 28. But basically, what the story is trying to say here is that Adam was the prototypical high priest of all creation. And he was ordained the priest, and all the other priests, if you read through the rabbinic traditions and stuff, they trace their origins back to Adam in the garden. And Aaron, his annual task was passing beyond the veil that covered the holiest of holies to make the sacrifice. And on that veil, there was depicted 2 cherubim. And once again, that as above, so below imagery. It was that the holiest of holies in the tabernacle was symbolizing the Garden of Eden, the presence of God. They had to pass through these cherubim to enter the presence of God, and the priest was the only one allowed to do that. But so basically, the connection between Adam's original priesthood and the Aaronic high priest is most notably highlighted by the prophet Ezekiel.
Oh boy!
And chapter 28. Now listen to this. This is pretty wild here. In this story, Ezekiel is talking to the king of Tyre and condemning him. But like halfway through, it totally shifts. You can tell he's talking to a man, but then all of a sudden it shifts right here. And just listen to some of this wording and ask yourself, is this a human? Or is this any human or is this an entity of some kind that he's talking to here? But it says, you were in Eden, the garden of God. And remember, he's talking to the king of Tyre here. Every precious stone was your covering. Sardis, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, emerald, carbuncle, and crafted in gold were your settings and your engravings. On the day that you were created, they were prepared. You were an anointed guardian cherub. I placed you. You were in the holy mountain of God, and in the midst of the stones of fire you walked, and that you were blameless in all your ways from the day that you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. In the abundance of your trade, you were filled with violence in your midst, and you sinned. So I cast you as a profane thing from the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, O guardian cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. And then it goes on down, and it, I was talking about the priesthood and stuff. It says, by the multitude of your iniquities and your unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuaries. So it's saying, you were perfect in your ways. You were in the garden of God, a guardian cherub. Every precious stone was your covering, and it lists 9 stones. He's obviously, to me, he's not talking to the king anymore. He's talking to a spiritual entity behind the king, influencing him, basically. And to me, this calls back to that Nakash, that shining one. And when you look at the description of his coverings, it said, the coverings that God made for him, diamond, beryl, onyx, topaz, gold engravings and encrustings. This outfit or this covering looks identical to the ephod that the priests wore when they entered the holiest of holies. The only difference is that the priests, when you read through the Old Testament, there was 12 stones listed, where here there was only 9. So with that in mind, this thing would definitely be shining.
Mm-hmm.
So it fits the description
Reflective.
of the Nakash.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so let me see.
You think this Nakash is just some like entity that behind the scenes is like the puppet master of some kind for, and it's like some, maybe it's just like a, high priest on a trying to control early civilization. I don't know.
Well, see, when you look at the Bible, okay, like for instance, Mount Olympus, you had a pantheon of gods.
Yep.
And they all had their own little sections of creation or whatever to reign over.
Yeah.
Right. But you had one high king of the gods, which was Zeus.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't mess with Zeus.
Yeah. And you have all these same stories throughout multiple religions of the world. And that is in the Bible. God has a divine council. And it talks about in Psalms 82 and several other places in the Bible. But God, Yahweh, was the creator God above them all. So this Nakash, this shining one, was a divine being on God's holy mountain and a member of his council, which he does rebel with Adam and Eve here and is cast out. So therefore becomes basically like a fallen angel. And he's
okay. I see where you're going with this.
And and he rebelled and he turned. So at one time, he was like the high priest over all creation.
Yeah.
And because he rebelled, his coverings that was described here, what I think, was taken from him and given to humanity. So the thing that you tried to trick and curse, basically, God exalts and takes your privileged position and gives it to mankind.
Okay.
And not only that, you had 9 stones. I'm giving mankind 12. So not only are you being thrown out of heaven, downgraded, and this lesser being is getting your coverings, I'm giving them some extra stones and they're going to be exalted over you anyway. And so that's the garments or the skins. So, and that's Satan's who I'm talking about here.
Oh, I'm picking up what you're laying down, brother.
Yeah. So it's like that answers your question why Satan hates humanity, why he's constantly trying to torment you and put you through the ringer, is because, number one, he was created first. He's the elder brother. The divine race was created before us. When you get in the book of Job, he condemns Job and he says, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Where were you when I done this and I done that? And he says, and the morning stars, the sons of God, sang for joy at the sight of creation. So it was showing that these divine beings,
the
like
old
the
ones.
Nakash,
the old ones.
They're our elder brothers.
Yeah, they're demigods. I mean, that's like Thoth. That's even before Osiris and the Egyptians. They all kind of have their
same with the Greek, and it goes same again with what he's saying. With you have the gods, and then you have the Olympians, right? You had Hercules, and you had the actual champions on Earth that were like part god, part human.
Odin and Thor and all those.
Oh man,
those are the Nephilim.
Yep,
and
the Nephilim from Genesis 6.
Yep. There you go. Yeah, absolutely. Hercules, right? Hercules basically a Nephilim.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all the Indian legends are very, very similar.
But it permeates
the star people.
So many different theologies and cultures and histories, too, of, even certain timelines and certain dates and certain things that just make,
The thing is that Justin's a Christian, VJ actually is a Christian, but, he's very much into Hinduism and yoga and things like that. But everybody's kind of saying the same thing. It's just in a different.
What I'm saying.
If we all spoke the same language, we would find out that we actually all have the same history, pretty much. If you go back far enough, I mean,
and we did at one time.
Yep.
Tower of Babel.
Yep, bro.
Oh,
I love that. That's what I'm not a very big religious buff even growing up.
Did you end up getting connected with VJ?
Well, no, Dr. Judd Burton and stuff. We talked to him a little bit about that, but with Esau and these garments, man. Now going back to Esau, and I gave you that context that way you knew about the Nakash and what the coverings were, because a lot of people miss that whole context. A lot of people just think, oh, God killed a goat or a lamb and made them some boxer briefs and a bra.
Wow.
No, there's a lot more to that.
Yeah.
But the birth of Esau.
Comfortable.
Not bad.
Right. Be warm. Itchy, but warm.
You got to pay a lot of money in REI for that.
Get your goat strap.
Yeah. But the birth of Esau, remember I mentioned he was the twin brother, the two nations, and Satan and his curse, said your seed and her seed will be at enmity with one another. So Genesis 25:25 is the birth of Esau, and it says, the first came out red all over his body like a hairy cloak. So they called his name Esau.
What?
After his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. So my opinion here is that we already see this Nakash, Satan, flipping the script of the curse. We know the chosen seed is Jacob from the biblical text. So in my opinion, what was this Nakash flipping them around in the womb and pushing Esau to the front? That way his heel was pushing on Jacob's head and Jacob was holding Esau's heel coming out. But the thing I want to really draw emphasis on is he comes out red. And hair all over his body like a cloak as an infant, newborn infant.
Sounds squatchy to me.
Exactly. That's what I thought.
Yeah, dude. That's not normal.
I think I've heard this story too. I feel like Mr. E talked to me about Esau or something during CryptidCon or something.
I've never heard anything about this. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I like it. Definitely interesting.
There's some wild stuff in the Old Testament, bro.
Oh, yeah, man. And the thing is, if you're not reading it with their ancient mindset and knowing their history and their euphemisms and all this kind of stuff, you miss a lot of it, man.
But that's the whole thing about
going
to church, too. Like, as a kid, I heard the same stories. I heard the same Bible verses, whatever. They never got any of the good stuff.
I don't think a lot of it was
They should have done Ezekiel more, got an Enoch or something, or
Satan and all these things were people. They were demigods. They were superhuman ancient people that were living in a very advanced civilization that was just ended up. They were, the people of old is what the Egyptians, the before time, they talk about, where they have these kings lists where these guys live to be 1,000 years old.
Yeah,
and the Sumerians have a similar kings list. And this is the pre-dynastic Egyptians where they don't even, and that's who's building these cyclopean structures with these massive, massive blocks, which, maybe Egypt was, the pyramids and the Sphinx, I think, were built right after the Younger Dryas as a way to get people together to build something to re-encode all of the knowledge that they had lost from the floods. And that's their story. Thoth and all of these guys came to Atlantis. They were all giants from Atlantis to Egypt. They encoded the Sphinx and these temples to preserve their knowledge and, essentially got hunter-gatherers together so it's kind of like your first big civilization after the flood. But before that, that's where all the stuff is underwater, under ice, and, we're going to start finding right now.
It's what they call the Golden Age.
Yeah.
When the gods walked amongst men.
And a lot of
and that's
South
Genesis
America.
6. You get the book of Enoch, it said these fallen angels came down, and just like Prometheus, He brought the fire, which was symbolic for the knowledge. That's exactly what happened according to the book of Enoch. They came down, bred with human women. In these ancient societies, to get a bride, you had to pay a price for it. And marriages were arranged strategically to better the family. So how would you do any better than trading your daughter to, what the Indians call the star people, the people that come from heaven, that were huge, had all this knowledge, could build these megalith sites and super strength, and had all this knowledge, you know what I mean? So, and they were worshipped as gods. And that's just like these elongated skulls. Yeah. I mean, you find these down in Peru.
Yeah.
All these that you find here,
that's not normal.
Those are Caracas.
They're missing the Sadra Sutra lines here.
Right.
And people say, oh, well, it's head binding. Well, all the ones that we found that we know are head binding, they still have that Sadra Sutra line.
Right. You're not gonna lose that.
Right.
Binding doesn't lose that. And then also your cranius magnum, where your spine attaches to your skull, it's always dead center for balance to hold the head up, right?
Right.
Well, when you look at these guys, their cranius magnum is all the way at the back.
Yeah.
So I'll just put this on my finger for reference.
That's wild, dude.
It goes straight down. You'd be looking at your toes all the time.
Right.
So to counterbalance that, you would need an extra long neck.
Oh my,
dude!
And when you read the Bible, it talks about these giant clans, and it's called the Anakim, and the Anakim translates to long necked. So all that stuff's in there. But then you even ask yourself, well, who was these people trying to emulate? I jokingly use Morgan Wallen as a reference, the mullet. You see all these kids running around with these mullets and stuff a few years ago. They were trying to imitate Morgan Wallen.
Gotcha.
So all these ancient people that were binding their children's heads and doing this, which was excruciatingly painful.
Right.
They were doing it to emulate these Genesis 6 fallen angels.
That's interesting. I see what you're saying there. Right. Absolutely.
I mean, yeah, it's just crazy.
What do you think North America was?
Where do I think it was?
I don't know if you've ever come across like the civilization in North America. What do you think was going on there? Do you think it was some outpost from these civilizations?
What civilization are you talking about in North America?
Just all the mound builders and the ancient stuff that we have here, the Chacoans, I know, well, the South American Southwest, most of that influence is from the South, but I mean, you have a lot of people talk about Turtle Island here in North America, Ohio being part of Turtle Island, that it's really an Atlantis outpost. These are some things is there anything in the Bible or your research that talks about North America or another civilization that they came to? Because isn't that what Fritz Zimmerman kind of hits on a little bit? That he's trying to track when these giants came to North America.
Yeah, it's his view, which I share. It's called diffusionist. And basically, we believe that ancient man was sailing the globe and exploring all these different continents 100%. Long before the Vikings, long before Christopher Columbus. Yep. And that's why when you go to Egypt, you see these depictions of corn. Corn is not indigenous to the Middle East,
right?
But North America it is.
Yep.
And these giants, are associated with the worship of the sun. And the Phoenicians, in the Bible are recorded, and not just in the Bible, but just through many ancient cultures. The Phoenicians were known to be masters at being seafaring people.
Modern day Lebanon now.
And where they worshiped the sun, they loved copper. So they come to North America, and that's what they were mining for, all this copper and stuff. Yeah. And then you find all the Egyptian artifacts in the Grand Canyon. I think that biblically it's mentioned as there's this land that's kind of mysterious, is like Ophir. I've heard people theorize that maybe that was North America.
That's what I was
asking. They would travel out here and mine and get all these resources and food and stuff, and then take it right back over.
Yeah. Well, you think about it, the South American and Yucatan cultures especially weren't going to be affected by the ice ages. So during even the Younger Dryas, like you said, an ice age would form, it would melt, all this flooding, it blocks out the sun for a little bit, and then it freezes again. Well, down in Peru and in Mexico, those cultures are going to keep continuing to evolve. And that's where you see Sacsayhuaman and all these just ridiculous, massive megaliths that fit together perfectly without even putting a piece of paper through them in between the cracks. And so that's where I think South America and the Yucatan it was just never affected. Like I think North America had just been wiped out. So there's just not much for us. And the Olmecs and the Dogon and the connections with African cultures but I think South America and the Yucatan was just a hub for so many ancient cultures.
Look at the Olmec and the statues from Easter Island.
Mm-hmm.
They look so much like African nation peoples.
Yeah, and definitely Polynesian. And there's multiple. Those Olmec heads, some of them do look African. Some of them look European almost too. It's really, really strange. Some of them have beards with like pointed beards.
Mesopotamian. And
it is really strange.
And that's like those skulls. LA done DNA testing on it. And that's what that one is. It's an actual a casting of those Paracas skulls, one of them.
Yep.
And the DNA testing they done shown that they were from the Levant.
Now,
how did it wind up all the way over there?
I have heard that what's that genome called? Genome X, or the haplogroup X, is this European DNA that they've found in some people in South America, Native Americans in North America, this haplogroup X. I don't understand it. I feel dumb when I hear people try to explain it. I still have not been able to wrap my head around just how that DNA ended up over here, but it's there.
Because they was sailing over here.
Yeah.
And I love how he said it too, because he tied it with the Bible. He said that, and that's what's crazy is when you look at all the tribes listed that they attacked and obliterated, and God said, kill every man, woman, and child, don't spare any. It looks kind of ruthless.
Yeah.
But it's a seed war. If you look and do the research, he has them travel, long distances, passing many tribes, and he tells them, don't harm this tribe, don't bother these people. But then they'll travel, hundreds of miles to a certain clan that God tells them to specifically go after. And every single clan that he tells them to devout to destruction, when you do the research, they were all giant clans. They were cleansing the land of these giants, and the DNA is what he's trying to do. And what happened is these Phoenicians and these people were already, experts at building ships and sailing the seas. L.A. and Fritz theorize, and it makes a lot of sense to me and it answers a lot of questions, is that they knew that they were clearing out the Levant. News was traveling. So the ones that could get away run to these ships and set sail for America, because they'd been going back and forth there this entire time, and they knew it was far enough away that they could live and thrive.
That makes sense. If they were coming here to get copper from Michigan and all these big, giant, huge copper deposits that we have, and they could easily get up there through the Great Lakes system and up through the rivers from the East Coast. It's interesting stuff. And I'm definitely a dispersion person too, a diffusion person. I don't think that the oceans were blockades for people to trade information and art. I just don't. I think that people were traveling in ancient times, I think
we just don't want to admit that there was a lot more seafaring activity. There's a lot higher frequency of contact between ancient civilizations.
We do it better.
We just don't want to admit the fact that maybe they were just seafaring. Maybe they didn't have airplanes and flying around, but they were really rocking the boats and they were getting back and forth across, Tamil Nadu, following the turtles, water, following the currents, oceanic travel and navigation. I mean, again, it's you got the structures and settlement stuff they found on Africa, whatever, 500,000 years. I mean,
you got to talk to VJ. I know you asked for his information.
I definitely will be.
Justin, I'd let VJ know. I think he did accept your invitation to connect. Yeah, he will blow your mind. He's got that knowledge from ancient India. He's got that lens, and then comes over to the United States and sees ancient sites here with a totally different perspective than we do. That's what really struck me with VJ is looking at the similarities from his culture in India in these ancient places in Ohio. And
it's kind of like pattern recognition. You're seeing the same things and the same kind of patterns, and you're going, why?
Words. He started digging into the languages.
It'd be like you going to another country and going, that's a baseball diamond. They're playing baseball out there. What the hell? That's baseball. I know baseball, but they're not calling it baseball. You know what I mean? Like it'd be like same kind of concept. It's just you would have such an overwhelming recognition of it and like this weird, like why it'd be almost kind of like deja vu. Like, why do I recognize this? Because it shouldn't make sense. It shouldn't line up because what we're told.
We just put so many blockages on, like, no, this is the way it just is. But what if it's not?
Mental filters.
What if it's not the way it is? Yeah. What if it's something that we're missing and we're not leaving an open conversation to add to the story?
All I know is that I don't know.
It's okay. You can add to the story.
All I know is that I don't know.
You can't say you know. That's what drives me nuts. We know. We know better. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're wrong. Could it be?
Very possible.
It's only been 100 years, really. Archaeology's and these kind of studies have been going, and they don't introduce enough multidisciplines.
Yeah. Well,
and they don't really research all that much.
No.
I mean, let's put it this way. They're not in the archives digging up documentation most of the time. They're looking for, pottery shards and
I see what you're saying, archaeologist.
Yeah, absolutely. So, someone like Jeffrey Wilson, he's research. He's digging back into the history of everything. Whereas,
scholars are not.
It's just a different.
The scholars are not.
It's important.
Well, maybe some scholars are. There are some scholars that I just think if you don't toe the line, you're in trouble. No, if you don't toe the line, though, you're in trouble. It's just like with anything, man, in any profession, in any career. You don't toe the line with the narrative and the filtration method that they're using. They'll be like, get so-and-so the hell out of here. Like, they're going to screw things up for us.
Yeah. And I was curious, what did you find from the time of the Garden of Eden? Because I've always wondered, there's just these massive, like the Bible and all these ancient stories, they tell these stories in chunks, but there's like what happened from Adam and Eve all the way to Noah's time and Enoch before the Great Flood. Like, what is happening in that time? What is the civilization like? There's just giant people running around everywhere? And it's a civilization that's kind of like falling down. What do you think?
Well, I mean, that was one of those times where, you didn't have written languages. Even when you got the Bible, the Old Testament written down, it was passed through oral tradition, for thousands of years before it was finally written down. But if you believe that, the fallen sons of God came down and bred with the daughters of men, just like the Olympians gods say, just like the Norse mythology says. I mean, you see it everywhere.
Oh, are you talking about what's it called? Oh God, what's that movie? Oh my God, with the Norse mythology.
Oh yeah,
you know what I'm talking about?
Yep, Northmen.
No, the old story. One of the oldest stories. Oh. I'm never going to think of this.
Oh, Grendel.
That. What is that?
With the Grendel.
What is that? You know what?
Hansel and Gretel.
Beowulf.
Beowulf.
Yeah. That kind of weird stuff.
So this was a time when you had giants running around. You had gods. I mean, it's Lord of the Rings.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That's how it was back then.
Yep. Wow.
And then it was continual evil, and it just got so bad that that God brought the flood and hit the first true great reset.
Yeah.
Where does Atlantis fit from your studies with the Old Testament? Because really we
you
get
don't
the
even
story
see
from
it
the
in the
Greeks.
Bible.
Okay, because that's just a big missing chunk. Or does those stories start after Atlantis was already formed?
My opinion, and I mean, like I said, I mean, I don't have all the answers. I got more questions than I got answers.
Yeah, I feel you.
But I was always under the opinion that Atlantis was an allegory for
the flood,
the pre-flood world.
Mm-hmm. It's not
the pre-flood world was an advanced civilization where the gods, lowercase g gods, the fallen sons of God came down, bred with the daughters of men.
What you're saying.
They crossed DNA and made minotaurs and all these crazy, just monsters of the ancient world. You have all these myths about, and just advanced technology, and finally till God got fed up with it.
Do you think that Atlantis was wiped off by God? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I think
Atlantis was an allegory for the entire civilization of Earth.
Yeah.
Whoa.
It's an allegory.
Yeah. It's not there might be a city, because the Greeks, Solon, who is Socrates' grandfather, he got the story.
So you think it's a Greek allegory
Egypt,
for the biblical flood?
Atlantis was never an
same
Egypt,
story,
Egyptian
different version.
Feel you. I got you now. Sorry,
Atlantis
I'm slow on the uptake. I'm
wasn't
with you.
an Egyptian word. There was no Egyptian word for Atlantis.
And I really don't know that much about Atlantis.
Solon called it Atlantis.
I know enough about it,
but there's no word or story. There is a story in these ancient texts.
Plato or Socrates wrote about it sinking.
Yeah, but they went and studied in Egypt and got the story from Solon.
From Menethos.
Traveled to Egypt and was studying the mystery schools.
This wasn't a first-hand written account by the Greeks.
No, they learned it from the Egyptians.
Gotcha.
But the Egyptians didn't call it Atlantis. That's what Solon called it. And then he passed the story down through his lineage. And Socrates is the one that wrote it down and told it from Solon's account, from going to Egypt.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Telephone.
And that's just Greek. So before that, the Egyptians had the story, and the Temple of Edfu, or one of those, is where it's a giant, huge hieroglyphic wall and perfectly carved, but it does tell the story of the old ones that came from the land.
I think the pyramid and all that is pre-flood buildings and stuff that survived.
Yeah.
Because like that, I can't remember the name of the king, but the king that found, according to legend, the Sphinx, he was wandering the desert and seen the head of it tipping out of the sand and heard a voice saying, dig me up.
Yep, absolutely.
He found it fully formed, and then later, I think it was Anubis.
It was
then later a king carved his face into it, because the head is totally not proportionate to the body.
Right.
Repurposed it.
It's way smaller.
And if you look at all these civilizations, because we was talking about it earlier, they find these megaliths and these great structures, and they build their civilizations around it.
Yeah.
So it's like you talk about Atlantis, being this, great city with all these advanced technologies. Mm-hmm. It was, in fact, symbolic for just the pre-flood world.
Yeah.
Here's this big pyramid laid perfectly north, south, east, west. Lined up astronomically with Orion, with the Nile lining perfectly with the Milky Way. And they talk about, the esoteric schools, they believe that it was used to like a planisphere, where you observatory, and basically your spirit passed through the seven spheres, and all this type of stuff. So it was like, and they even say in the mystery schools that later develops into your secret societies, like the cult of Mithras and Freemasonry and all this stuff. That was their some of their rites and their initiations, that they would ascend the 7 steps, in the ladder, Jacob's ladder, or in Freemasonry, when they go to the second degree, they go up the spiral staircase that has 7 steps. That was all symbolic for the 7 planetary spheres of ascension that the body must go through, or the spirit must go through in the afterlife. It's just all kinds of crazy, symbolism and stuff with the mystery schools with that. It's wild. There's a lot there.
It is. And the Sphinx being built probably before the Younger Dryas floods because of the enclosure and all of the weathering that they had found coming off of the Sphinx enclosure. Guess what? 12,800 years ago, that's when it was raining really freaking hard.
I mean,
and they have the geological evidence of that. And at that time, guess where the Sphinx was aligned to? Leo.
Yeah.
That thing was a lion.
Makes sense then.
So back then, the precession of the equinox.
Why? I don't understand.
The wobble of the Earth. Now it's facing a different constellation.
Why mess with the timeline?
12,800
Why mess
ago.
with the timeline though? Why distort time history? You know what I mean? Like, even if you want to say, I get that, but even if you want to say you, Justin, were like ruler of the planet for 100 years, great, 100 years. Is that what it's about? Is it to say like, I just want to misconstrue how long it was here? Like, I don't get it. What's the whole point? Why can't they just say, hey, it actually did happen at this point, and here, like, to me, it doesn't make sense.
I think it's just ego strokes because think about it, it's just men in general.
Mm-hmm. We're flawed.
Hey, I caught a 6-inch bass the other day at the river. Oh, yeah? Well, I once caught a 12-footer at that very same spot. Oh, you did? Oh, well, I caught one that was 2 foot. You know what I mean? We're ego maniacs, and it's all, a woohoo measuring contest.
Yeah. Well,
and even Gary Wayne was talking about, the Sumerian Kings list, how you see if one king says he killed 1,000 men by his sword, the next king, and he ruled for 100 years, the next king ruled for 200 years and killed 2,000 with his sword.
Right.
So it's kind of like they used it as veneration.
Right. And or if you're Kim Jong-il, you've hit like 12 holes in one on your first time golf.
Right.
And you never poop.
You wipe your ass with butterflies.
Yeah.
You never poop. I love that. Everybody poops except for Kim Jong-il.
God.
Yeah. But he even said, Gary said that they get misconstrued because it's his opinion that the incoming king or new god would basically inherit the mythos of the other, and they would just build upon it.
Yeah, they did that all through Cambodia at Angkor Wat and all of the structures and temples and sites out there. Just when one religion would come through, they would just deface all the old gods and they would put up theirs, and you'd like walk in and they'd be like, yeah, they just never put another one up. It's like somebody coming into another house and going, I just forgot to hang a picture there.
Cholula. Yeah. Cholula. That
it really muddies the waters of history.
Yeah. But, and that's the whole thing. That's a real problem too, is we don't have a great contiguous contextual history, right? Like we have these broken events of setting this library on fire or burning this section or getting rid of all these books or
because of ego too.
And the cloistering and the still guarding of information, internet really helped level the playing field. Everybody could get to information equally, but there are still very sacred books and texts and tomes and scripts and whatever that the whole Da Vinci Code stuff with where he's in the, the Vatican, and he's in the glass rooms where it's, humidity controlled and all that. I mean, I believe that's real. Like they have miles and miles and miles and miles of bookshelves,
God,
right?
I'd love to get down there, bro.
Right. So I still think there are some of those kind of Fort Knox of informational cornucopias that exist out there.
Smithsonian's one of them.
In private collections.
Oh, yeah.
Think of private collections too. Like
think
that's
about
not
that
a joke.
One billionaire that got busted with all the
cuneiform tablets, all the early Sumerian tablets. The guy for Hobby Lobby or Michael's or whatever it was one of those craft shops.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. He's talking about the muddying of the waters and stuff, and how you would you say in India how they just defaced the statues, but
it was in Cambodia
on it and stuff.
Yeah.
Cambodia.
Yeah.
So you get this, even in the Middle East, because with this Esau rabbit hole that I went down in the Bible, it talks about just basically it says that Esau was a mighty hunter, and that's the same descriptions used for Nimrod. Nimrod was a mighty hunter.
Yes, he was.
Okay. Well, it says that Esau was a mighty hunter in the field, and one day he comes back from the field and is starving, and tells his brother, because he's the eldest, he gets the inheritance. Told his brother, give me some of your stew that you're fixing, and I'll give you my birthright. You can have it. And Jacob's like, well, promise me that you will. Yeah, I'll give you some of this food. So he trades his inheritance for a bowl of stew. And it's just kind of vague, and that's all you really hear about it. And it always stood out to me. It's like, dude, you had the keys to the kingdom and you traded it for a bowl of soup. Why? This makes no sense to me. But when you dig into these other extra biblical books, that's not in the canon, like the book of Enoch you referenced earlier, Bub.
Yeah.
But Jasher goes into more details on some of these vague stories. Well, the book of Jasher says that he did, in fact, come from the field. But what they leave out, and it might have been because this was part of the oral tradition and they thought everybody already knew it. There was no sense in beating a dead horse.
Right.
But Esau was in the field, and you got to remember, he was born red all over, hairy like a cloak from head to toe, very Sasquatchy or very
Jersey Devil,
werewolfy. You know what I mean?
Dog Manny.
So, and Nimrod was described as a mighty hunter. Well, in the book of Jasher, it says that Nimrod and two of his mighty men, which is in Hebrew Gabor, which is the same words used to specifically describe the Nephilim.
Okay.
The Gibborim.
Okay.
And so it says that they were hunting in the field, and that Nimrod despised Esau and stalked him and was after him his whole life. So if he was a mighty hunter, it's like he's seen this beast of the field and he was hunting him like a wild game.
Wow.
And it said that Esau saw this and hid in the bush. And that when the two other Gibborim walked away, he jumps out from his hiding place and kills Nimrod.
What?
Bro.
Then the Gibborim turn around and come after him, and he fights them, to the death, and ends up killing all of them. But he chops off the head of Nimrod. And then the military men that were there, like hanging out on the outskirts, heard all the screaming and come running. He saw them coming. And it said that he turns around and takes the garments from Nimrod. And it said, and these were the garments that made him to rule over all the nations, and that made him a mighty man. And I thought that was kind of strange. I was like, well, these garments, what's so special about these garments, that he made sure to grab these from Nimrod. Well, then it goes on to say that he runs back home, and he's, been in an epic battle with 3 giants, and he storms into his house. And in that story in Genesis, he says, I'm starving, give me the stew. And Jacob's kind of, pleading with him, promise me you're not going to deceive me. And he's like, I will be dead. What use is a birthright to me? So he runs in, and this is what the context misses, is that he just got in a fight with 3 giants to the death, was probably bleeding out, knocking on death's door. So his brother Jacob fed him and nursed his wounds and looked after him. But he took the garments and his inheritance as a trade to save his life.
Doesn't seem like a fair trade.
Right. And when you dig through Jasher, it talks about these garments again. And of course, you're like, what's so special about these garments?
I really want to know about these garments, bro.
Yes. And it says that these garments, when you go back to Jasher 7, it talks about these garments, and it says, and Cush, the son of Ham, the son of Noah, took a wife in those days in his old age, and she bare a son, and they called his name Nimrod, saying at the time, the sons of men again began to rebel and transgress against God. And the child grew up, and his father loved him exceedingly, for he was the son of his old age. And the garments of skin, which God made for Adam and his wife, when they went out of the garden, were given to Cush. For after the death of Adam, his wife, the garments were given to Enoch, the son of Jared. And when Enoch was taken up to God, he gave them to Methuselah, his son. And at the death of Methuselah, Noah took them and brought them into the ark. And they were with him until he went out of the ark. It says, and in their going out, Ham stole those garments from his father Noah and took them and hid them from his brothers. And when Ham begot his firstborn Cush, he gave him the garments in secret. And Cush had them many days. And Cush begot Nimrod and gave Nimrod the garments. And it says here specifically, and when Nimrod grew up, and when he was 20 years old, he put on those garments. And Nimrod became strong when he put on the garments. And God gave him might and strength, and he was a mighty hunter in the earth, a mighty hunter in the field, and hunted the animals, and built altars, and offered up upon them animals before the Lord. So when you read in Genesis, it's like Nimrod wasn't a Gibor, but all of a sudden it says he became Giborim.
Sounds like Neo from the Matrix, like he got the upload and like got all the information on how to become like a badass.
And Jasher tells you that when he became 20 years old, he put on these garments, which were the coverings of Satan, the Nakash. And once he put these on, he became a Giborim.
So because it
like
says,
a metamorphic change.
Like you said in Jasher, it talks about how the garments came from Adam and Eve, and the Nashir was the one that was talking to Adam and Eve and basically got the garments from them. And so this whole time, those garments are being passed down. And so do you think it's just some kind of like evil thing? Do you think it's, I mean, what do you think the garments are? Is it just something for power to then go out and conquer? Or what is what do they get at there?
Well, see, I think that, obviously there's some power in them because they were made by God and given to the Nakash, and they were his coverings.
They were made rebelled by God first. That's right. Okay.
Yeah. And then he removed the garments, the coverings of the Nakash, and gave it to Adam and Eve. So then it was passed down through the lineage. And then when it's given to Nimrod, it just all of a sudden he becomes a Giborim, a Gibborim, a Nephilim. But I think it's not a this or this, it's a this and this. I think it was through the Tower of Babel, occult practices, and sex magic, different things like that, combined with these garments, that he became a mighty man. And there's just something in there.
The origin to priestly robes. You know what I mean? Like the garments that people wear. Like you always wonder why, growing up, serving for Catholic priests, like we always wear robes. They have these big flashy robes.
Cassocks.
Yeah, was that what they're called?
Cassocks.
And they have the scarves that they put around them. And they wear these big, giant, crazy hats. I mean,
maybe that's what it is. What is that called?
Wonder
what's that called? I can't remember.
Where all that comes from.
The priestly tie.
Yeah. And so many religions have, their priests are robed and have these garments and
a lot of symbols.
Kings.
Yeah. It's interesting.
It's an interesting story. It's
interesting.
I haven't heard that.
See, I think we see Esau and Nimrod in the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Okay.
And that's why I was getting at the things being twisted.
Okay.
Because a lot of people already connect Gilgamesh to Nimrod. I mean, that's a pretty well-known thing right there.
Mm-hmm.
But what's crazy is like when you go through the king's list and all these other things, it mentions Gilgamesh and it says that he was a great builder, and you think of the Tower of Babel, and the Sumerian king's list talks about him, Merkur. His root name means Nimrod. But where you have, like we were talking about, the inheriting the mythos and stuff like that, it kind of muddies the water. But what was interesting was Gilgamesh's father is named as Lilu, and that he was part God, or 2/3 God, and which interestingly comes out to 66.6% divine. So, but his father, this Lilu, he was known as a demon of the vampire kind. So when you look back now at that story in Jasher, when he cuts off the head of Nimrod, when you read the mythologies, that's how you killed a vampire.
You're saying Nimrod was a vampire?
His father was a vampire, is what the what do you call it? The Sumerian King's List says.
What?
Why do all
Gilgamesh's
these cultures have so many different with Nimrod
archetypes
in Gilgamesh? They're all.
I didn't know there
place.
were vampires and giants and all kinds of wild
giants
shit like
for
this.
sure. I never heard about.
I had no idea about any vampires in the Bible.
Well,
yeah, even the Bible it says
the Sumerian reliefs. They have these giants with these little people sitting on their laps. That might be,
but that's vampires. We're talking vampires.
Yeah, vampires. I'm just saying giants.
Giants. We're giants. Yeah, I get it. But vampires. I did not know there were vampires back in biblical historical context like that.
Yeah, well, even some of the vampires are, the giants when they come out of Exodus and they went to scope the land, they come back. You remember what they said? They said the Nephilim are here and they devour the inhabitants of the land. They were eating the people and drinking the blood. And that's vampiristic. And that's why you get the commandments in the Bible in the Old Testament. It says specifically, do not drink the blood. Why was he telling them do not drink the blood? Because obviously there was people doing it. And, there's power in the blood. It's the life force.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. I was like, well, maybe there's a correlation to why he chopped his head off because, he's part, vampire.
The first vampire.
Abraham Lincoln, the vampire slayer.
Cryptids.
Yes.
Esau.
And then it gets even more interesting.
The first
Gilgamesh,
the first vampire.
He makes a friend in this epic.
Okay, now.
A guy named Enkidu.
Oh, yeah.
And it says that Gilgamesh was without equal. And so the gods, to equal and level out the playing field, made him an equal. And when it describes the creation of Enkidu, it says that the gods pinched a piece of red clay.
Mm-hmm.
Esau come out red, hairy all over, right? And it said that the pinch of red clay was threw into the wilderness, once again associated with Esau. And it says that he was a mighty man of the wilderness, and that he roamed with the beasts of the field. Okay, and it said that he was hairy, all over, and red. So it's like I see all these correlations with Esau, with this with this account in the Epic of Gilgamesh with Enkidu.
That's weird. That's interesting.
And so, in long story short, these guys end up meeting and have an epic battle. They challenge each other to see who's the strongest.
Oh boy!
And Enkidu or Gilgamesh basically cheats and stacks the deck. He sends out a harlot from the temple of Inanna, which is the goddess of sex and war.
All right.
To sleep with Enkidu for 6 days and 7 nights.
They know how to have a good time.
Death by snoo.
Yeah. And it says that once she does this, that it will basically weaken him, and that the beasts of the field will no longer accept him. And it says that when he goes back to the wilderness, all the beasts of the field flee from him. And that when he tries to run and chase them down, it says in quotations that it felt as though his body was tied down with a cord.
Oh, he turned soft.
Dude, is this the first Epstein case? Setting him up, setting the guy up.
Honeypot.
Yeah.
Well,
sounds like a honeypot to me.
He got, yeah.
Epstein?
Yeah. 6 days?
Oh, yeah.
6 days?
You're coming out of that. You're done.
You're not thinking straight after the first 6 minutes.
Yeah. So they end up fighting, but he ends up beating him. But Enkidu gets him down to one knee, and everybody watching thinks that he's about to win. But then last minute move, Gilgamesh throws Enkidu on his shoulder and body slams him to the ground and wins the match. So it's been inverted. Instead of Esau winning the battle, now Gilgamesh / Nimrod wins, and the two become best friends, and they go on all these epic journeys together. But I thought that was just cool, all the different little correlations, how, Nimrod, Gilgamesh, Esau, and Enkidu, and both of them, they're described the same exact way. They both fight, and it's just crazy when you see just another example, like we've been talking about several times tonight. Just the same story, just told in different contexts.
Right.
And Adamu in Sumerian,
don't know,
is Adam. I mean, it tells the story of genetic manipulation. It sounds like cloning, like technology.
Isn't that what Adam and Eve sounds like? You made some out of a rib. I mean,
and that's what essentially the Zechariah Sitchin talks about is Adamu, and it's so close to the story of Adam and Eve.
Sure.
Which one do you think's older? Do you think the Sumerian text is older? Do you think those stories were taken and kind of by telephone turned into what the Old Testament became? What do you think the origin of the Old Testament is? I've always wondered that. Which comes first?
Well, I mean, if you go by scientific dating and stuff, the Sumerian and stuff like that definitely predates the biblical account. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people will take that and say, well, here you go, that's proof. This one was older, so they just copied it. Right. But the thing was the Jewish people, the Hebrews, they relied on oral tradition forever. So, I mean, honestly, we don't know for a fact, which one come up with which one first. But my opinion is that, and like I said, I have my preconceived notions. I'm a Christian man. I see things through a biblical worldview, but I'm not a coincidence theorist. If I see the same story, like the Great Flood and creation and all these things told out throughout all these different cultures, then it's the same account. It's just told, from different lenses and different, polytheists versus monotheists. Mm-hmm. And even like with the Corn Kings, for example, people want to throw up, like atheists still say, well, Jesus is just another archetype. If you look at Mithras, if you look at Adonis, if you look at Osiris, all of them are dying and resurrecting sun gods, and Krishna. It's just the same story told over and over again. It's an archetype. My point of view is that Satan, the Nahash, and these fallen angels, they were in heaven to start with. I think they knew the plans, so they come down and present themselves as these gods and try to tell the story, but in a perverted, distorted way. But Scripture even says what the devil means for harm, God uses for good for those who love him. And I've even proposed that these Corn Kings and things like that, and these different mythos, are preconditioning of the coming of Christ. Because if you think about it this way, if you believe in a dying and resurrecting God by whatever name, and you've been raised to believe that your whole life, and I show up and I can do great signs and wonders, and I'm telling you about Jesus Christ, and I'm telling you the story, you're going to be like, man, that sounds a lot like this story that I know. And I believe that. And you'd be a lot more prone to accept that because it's a familiar story than if I just come to you and told you some off the wall story that you never heard of. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like I view that as basically like a preconditioning of Christ, because I think it's just outlandish to believe that the creator of the universe didn't speak to his creation at all until the time of the Hebrews in Exodus, and only chose this small group of people to reveal himself to. I think he gave hints, in the very least, of himself throughout the world to prepare the way.
Yeah, because it is weird. Krishna is born of a virgin, has a miraculous birth. Mithra is a big one. And, not to say, with Jesus, it's like, well, no, it's not just cultures revisiting this. It's almost like this being or energy, if you want to get into, some of the like ascended master kind of world and some of that kind of stuff. It's a little bit new agey, but, what if there are these souls that just come back in times of need? And Mithras and Jesus and Krishna and all these kind of beings are somehow connected in some way. They all seem to have a similar story. It doesn't necessarily mean, oh, it's just made up story. Jesus never existed. They're just taking all these old. There's always a gray area. For me, it's somewhere in between. It's I don't discount any of those stories at all. I think they're all super, super important. And there are, archetypes that do kind of repeat throughout history, which is fascinating. And that's
and those preconditions either is not out of the norm for the Bible.
Yeah.
Like one thing people miss, are you familiar with the story of Jonah and the whale?
Yep.
A little bit. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. God tells him to go to Nineveh, which is modern day Iraq. You know what I mean? And they worship the god called Dagon. And Dagon was depicted as half fish, half man, and even some depictions it's a full fish with its mouth open and his upper body hanging out of the mouth of the fish.
I've seen
so
those.
He despised Jonah. Jonah despised those people. So God was saying he was going to destroy him, but he wanted him to go witness to them. That way maybe they would repent and turn and be saved. He didn't want them to be saved. So what does he do? He jumps on a boat and takes off in the opposite direction. Well, God brings a storm. He gets thrown off the boat and the great fish swallows him. Well, this fish goes to the beach of Nineveh and vomits him out onto the beach. So all the people of Nineveh witnessed this man getting threw up onto the beach out of this great fish. So then he starts telling them, hey, Yahweh's going to destroy you guys. You need to turn from all your false idols and all this other kind of stuff. And he's probably doing it half-heartedly because he didn't even want them to be saved anyway. And they do. They listen, they repent, and he is spared according to the story. So it's like I seen that as a preconditioning. God took a god they were worshiping, Dagon, and presented his messenger, his prophet, up as Dagon. Because think about it, if you're that ancient culture, you worship this half fish, half man.
So you think it was a sleight of hand trick?
It was basically God using and meeting those people where they were at to save them.
So interesting. That's wild. That's wild. That's an interesting take on it. It's
Good
very
stuff,
interesting.
Man. This is awesome.
It makes me,
Leviathan, in the Mesopotamia,
right?
You had the chaos dragon.
Oh, yeah.
All these different stories of these different gods defeating this chaos dragon and then out of chaos creating order. Well, when you look at the biblical text, that's what that is. It's God taking the mythos of these other people and retelling it to show that, basically like Baal. Baal had to fight this big chaos serpent, but he had to get a magical club, get all these help from these other gods, and he struggled with it and finally overcame it. Well, when you get into the story of Genesis, where it says that God's spirit hovered over the waters. Well, the waters is Yam. Yam was one of the names of these chaos dragons. So it's basically like a play on words and word association. So where their God struggled and barely defeated this chaos monster through the Genesis account, it's saying that basically Yahweh hovered over the waters, which was Yam, hovered over Yam, and his spirit just hovered over the waters and subdued chaos like a dog, like down boy. So it's like you see this all the time. They take the stories, the mythos and the gods and turn them to draw the people in and show that Yahweh was superior to their God.
Dude, dirty tricks have been happening forever and ever. People are like, I can't believe they're censoring the internet. Bro, there's been propaganda and sleight of hand tricks happening for the entire existence of humanity.
Seems like.
Oh man, Justin, this has been a rad conversation. I mean, I love your take. I love getting a lot of people, because everybody that's into this kind of stuff, like you said, you're coming from a Christian lens. I'm coming from kind of a historical, research of conspiracies and ancient civilizations and the paranormal, and I kind of take things from everything and then form my own, I guess you could call it stoner opinions. But, I have in my heart my beliefs about things, but there are so many unanswered questions with this stuff that I really do love getting a little piece. Like, I'm sure when you talk to LA and Heather, and you're putting all these pieces together for yourself as well. Yeah. And it's great. I mean, man, you're well read, well researched, and we appreciate the hell out of you for doing this and hanging out with us tonight. I would love to give you an opportunity to kind of give us some final words, and also let us know where we can find you. If people want to connect, where can we listen to the podcast and see everything that you're doing? Floor is yours, brother.
Once again, I appreciate you having me. I had a real good time just having the conversation, hanging out with you guys. I enjoy listening to your show, so to actually be a part of it, it's really cool, and I appreciate it. I got 2 podcasts, the Dig Bible podcast, and that's, diving into biblical history and the Word and these extra biblical books and things like that. And the Prometheus Lens podcast, that's my solo project. I just recently started it, but that one is not as biblically based as my other one. It's basically just looking at history, myths and legends and conspiracy theory, and just all different subjects that I find fascinating. And that's not so much a ministry as the Dig Bible podcast is, but that one, I do tell you outright that I am a Christian. And just like tonight, we talked about history and giants and architecture and just all these different things. And I do tie them in with biblical things and give you I'll tell you my opinion. Mm-hmm. But that's all it is. But yeah, come check it out and hang out with us. And I think you'll enjoy it. I talk to people, L.A. Marzulli, Gary Wayne, Judd Burton. I've had Timothy Alberino on, just a lot of interesting guys and some good conversations.
Man, that's great. I'm so happy for what you're doing, the path that you're on. It sounds like, you've got the passion for it. You're connecting with tons of other like-minded people. And, I wish you all the best with all your endeavors. And again, from all of us down here, we appreciate you. Thank you for doing this. And we will come right back, and we'll send you out with a proper goodbye. Bub and I will outro the show, and we'll chat here in a second. But, dude, thank you so much.
Appreciate you, man.
Oh, no, I appreciate you guys. Like I said, I live for this stuff. I love it.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Justin Brown, everybody.
Keeping them coming. Keeping them coming. Mikey the Magician.
Shit.
Magic Mike.
Well, hey, bro, that wasn't me. This is
rabbits out of the hat.
Justin was 100% reached out to me, and it only took me a few minutes to chatting with him a little bit and checking out his show.
Yeah, you're the glue. You're the magnet.
It just, I see what he's doing.
Center of the black hole, the bro zone here.
And it was an easy choice. It was an easy choice to bring him in on this. So,
what it felt like? Felt like Dumb and Dumber when they're going along in the shaggin' wagon. They're like, hey, there's some hitchhikers. Like, pick them up. Yeah. Let's go. Yeah. Let's get the convo going. I love it.
Yeah, and no matter what your background is, I will literally bring in a Quran scholar.
We will have a conversation with anybody because we want to hear every aspect and angle. Scholar. Yeah, I learned so much there I had no idea about.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, if they would have brought some of those books in, maybe I would have went to church more as a kid or paid attention.
Yeah, Joel Thomas.
Probably not. My ADD was strong as a child.
Another Christian friend, Joel Thomas.
Yeah.
Really into the Book of Enoch.
Sure.
Those guys should definitely connect. We'll have to.
It's interesting.
We'll have to send them Joel's way. There's a lot of overlap there.
Oh yeah.
You guys are great.
Cross-pollination.
Everybody in here tonight, you rule. We could not be doing this without you guys, and we 100% really, really, really do appreciate you guys. And if you want to support the show, all the links are in the description. All the links to find Justin and everything he's doing, Prometheus Lens and The Dig, is in the description.
Check his stuff out.
Check his stuff out. Share, like, subscribe, do the whole thing. Love, peace, and chicken grease. We're out. Oh, yeah. Thank you to Matt Disbro and Kyle Stoner and Master Control as well. Look at that. That's burning up in there.
Oh, that's hot.
Lit match. All right, guys.
The best.
Peace, y'all.